Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a seriously fascinating AI-generated legal assessment surrounding Dr. Chen Jingyuan. We're going to unpack a highly complex intersection of domestic criminal law, constitutional rights, and systemic policy. Basically, we're looking at what multiple large language models concluded when they analyzed the arguments in his legal defense.
Individual case abuse not only violates personal rights, but conflicts with national strategy and international law. That right there, that perfectly sets the stage for us. The AI synthesizes how micro-level legal actions can ripple out into massive, macro-level systemic issues. We aren't just looking at one man's case today. We're exploring how a justice system handles that incredibly delicate balance between state power and individual rights. And why does this matter to us? Well, because it shows how the fragility of digital speech directly connects to the absolute, universal necessity of due process.
Okay, before we get too deep, we absolutely have to establish our core premise. We are examining a normative legal assessment here, not verifying the raw facts on the ground. The AI models, whether it's ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever, are very clear on this. They're taking documents like the indictment, the verdict, and Dr. Chen's defense, and asking if these events occurred exactly as described, what are the legal implications? So think of it like we're doing a structural stress test of the legal system, based entirely on a specific set of alleged facts. To keep us from getting totally lost in the legal weeds, here is our roadmap for the explainer. We'll start with assessing the criminal charges, move into procedural and judicial misconduct, then look at constitutional and human rights, contrast party discipline versus law, and finally, wrap up with the systemic and structural impact.
All right, let's just jump right into part one, assessing the criminal charges.
So the entire prosecution basically hinges on this one specific charge: picking quarrels and provoking trouble. Under Article 293 of the criminal law, this is often called a pocket crime because it can be used as a bit of a catch-all. But penalizing online speech actually requires very specific elements. According to the AI's read of the judicial interpretations, you can't just post something incorrect. You must knowingly spread false information, and it must objectively cause severe social disorder.
And here is where things get really interesting. The AI points out that, again, assuming the allegations are true, the absolute core elements needed to prove this crime are missing. Look at how it breaks this down. For subjective intent, the prosecution allegedly presumed Dr. Chen knew the info was false just because he has a high education. Honestly, the AI notes that completely violates the basic principle of evidence-based judgment. Then, for the false information element, forwarding foreign political speeches or academic views involves value judgments, right? Not verifiable facts. You literally can't objectively prove an academic debate is a rumor. And finally, for severe social disorder, the AI found zero evidence of actual real-world harm or even a large online reach.
Which brings us nicely to part two, procedural and judicial misconduct. The big takeaway here is how the AI maps these specific alleged actions straight to some pretty severe violations of the criminal procedure law. If law enforcement arrested him without a warrant and didn't notify his family, that brushes right up against Article 238, illegal detention. If they use threats or physical force to extract his device passwords, the AI flags that as a potential violation of Article 247, extorting confessions by torture. And holding a secret trial while limiting his defense, that directly violates fundamental fair trial rights under Articles 183 and 33. Procedural rules aren't just polite suggestions, they are the literal bedrock of judicial legitimacy. The AI actually flags this fascinating and kind of terrifying concept called procedural hollowing. It's what happens when appeals are dismissed without any substantive review, stripping the defendant of their right to a real remedy. Imagine having a constitutional right to appeal, but the second instance court just rubber stamps the original verdict without holding a hearing or even looking at the defense's evidence. The process exists on paper, sure, but it is completely hollowed out of any actual justice. Okay, let's zoom out a bit for part three, constitutional and human rights. The analysis points out that these allegations represent a compounding, multi-layered infringement on core domestic and international rights. The AI models cross-reference the case facts with the Chinese Constitution and major international treaties like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And what they found was basically a domino effect of restrictions. It's not just a free speech issue under Article 35 of the Constitution, it cascades right into arbitrary detention, freedom from torture, and a severe lack of fair trial rights. Now, this highlights a really deep tension. The AI gives a pretty stark warning about treating academic and cultural sharing as criminal misinformation. Think about it. If you use criminal law to penalize forwarding foreign tweets or historical theories by labeling them as rumors, you are essentially criminalizing expressive freedom.
The AI notes that this overreach directly violates the principle of proportionality. Criminal law is supposed to be the absolute last resort, not a tool for regulating thought and academic debate.
This takes us into some really unique structural territory in Part 4, party discipline versus law. It is super interesting how the AI unpacks this dual identity system. It strongly emphasizes that applying party political standards to a non-party citizen is a massive legal overreach. Dr. Chen is a normal citizen. He is bound only by national law, like the Constitution and the criminal law. But the judicial officials handling his case? They're party members. That means they are bound by both national law and the much stricter internal regulations of party discipline. So, here's the twist. If these officials bypass the law while claiming party loyalty, they are ironically violating the party's own strict disciplinary codes. The AI analysis points out that party regulations actually demand that officials serve the people and strictly follow the law. You absolutely cannot substitute legal evidence with political loyalty. If an official uses political ideology to justify ignoring evidence or verbally abuses a citizen for smashing the party's pot, they aren't protecting the system. According to the AI, they are actively damaging the party's image and breaking their own organizational rules. Finally, let's look at the big picture in Part 5, systemic and structural impact. This sequence perfectly illustrates how punishing international academic sharing contradicts national strategy. The AI mapped out the consequences step by step. At the micro level, one individual's rights are violated. At the meso level, the entire judicial system loses credibility because procedures fail. But at the macro level, the state has official policies promoting a community of common destiny to encourage cross-cultural dialogue, along with comprehensive rule of law. When grassroots officials criminalize foreign academic content, they are literally contradicting the central government's own strategic international goals. Now, Dr. Chen's defense aggressively labels local authorities a judicial mafia, but the AI, it steps back and stays completely objective, applying the anti-organized crime law. It concludes that while there is absolutely a high risk of a systemic procedural failure and coordinated misconduct, legally proving they are an organized crime syndicate requires a massive burden of proof, like financial motives and a strict structural hierarchy that just isn't present in these documents alone. Where is the ultimate boundary between maintaining social order and preserving constitutional rights and procedural justice? As we wrap up this explainer, this case really leaves us with a heavy question to ponder. The AI's assessment shows us that when the rules of evidence and procedure are bypassed, it doesn't just harm one individual. It hollows out the justice system and undermines the very policies the state is trying to protect. So what do you think? Is the best way for a legal system to course correct when these procedural breakdowns happen? It's definitely something to think about as you continue exploring the intersection of law and policy. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.